to international business. As promised, we're going to be talking about negotiations. We're going to be talking about how to negotiate, some things to be mindful of, and what kind of, we're going to give you some real-world examples of some negotiations I've been in, and I'm sure some of you have some negotiations that you want to share also. But before we dive in too much about global negotiations, I have to tell you and define for you the two types of negotiations. And I want you to remember this, and I want you to carry this for the rest of your life. How many of you know someone who people feel or it's just kind of common knowledge that they are a good negotiator? How many of you know someone that it seems by nature they're a good negotiator? Or how many of you know someone who espouses themselves to be a good negotiator? And light on overlay is too bright, can barely read that. Okay, so how do I fix this?
You just push down those two lights.
Oh, okay, I see. So that would make it too bright. That would make it better. Whoops. Global negotiation, that's still a little bright. I wonder what, let me just take those out. All right, so while Robert's fixing this, there we go. Thank you so much, Ben. Thank you, Robert. I appreciate that. So we all know someone who believes that they themselves are a great negotiator. And the negotiation that we're talking about, that we're defining, the negotiation that we're defining in that respect is really when there's a win-lose scenario. When it's negotiating for a car, when it's negotiating for maybe some tickets to something, or when it's haggling in a marketplace or something along those lines. That's one type of negotiation. There are two types. There are two types. I have a family member who everyone regards as a just hardcore, hard-nosed negotiator. They're not going to budge. You know, they get their way a lot of times. They're a little stubborn. And that's that win-lose scenario I was talking about. That's negotiation on the lowest level. That's negotiations on the lowest level. When it comes to real negotiations, when it comes to global negotiations, when it comes to a win-win scenario, what I'm talking about is collective bargaining. And we've heard the term collective bargaining. I think we hear it most often when it comes to NBA or NFL when they're having their negotiations about salary caps, et cetera, et cetera. You need to know and you need to make the distinction between these two types of negotiations. Because when you know or you hear somebody is a good negotiator, which one is it? And which one is it that you value most? Which one is it that you value most? Clearly, in my eyes, it's the collective bargaining. We have distributive bargaining, and this is a win-lose. This is your win-lose scenario. And you have your collective. And this is your win-win scenario. there are going to be times when you're negotiating with a joint venture internationally. There are going to be times when you're negotiating with the supplier internationally, and you beating them up on price isn't going to create the win-win. More often than not. It can, there are exceptions. There are exceptions. But what you want to create in the global marketplace is a win-win scenario. Why is a win-win, especially with global negotiations, why is that critical? Why is that important? Why is it that we don't want necessarily a distributive situation? Because when future negotiations come up next time, there's an excellent point. Well, one of these is long-term and one of these is short-term. Which one is short-term? That's right. That's right. Artemis, Tim, Ben. This is short-term. You're not ever going to see that individual ever again. You don't care if you see that individual ever again. When you go into a car dealership, you should be thinking, okay, this is the price I'm willing to pay, and I don't mind beating up the salesman or woman, and I don't mind getting beaten up myself a little bit. It's a win-lose scenario. You shouldn't be thinking about building a long-term relationship. You're trying to get the best rock-bottom price that you possibly can. And yet somehow in our society we value this. And there is value to it. Don't get me wrong. But somehow we associate those individuals that can nickel and dime really, really well, like a scalper on Saturday or Sunday at the football stadium. Somehow we believe that that makes you somehow, it gives you some kind of leverage. You know, the best negotiators aren't distributive bargainers. They're collective bargainers. How do you create a win-win scenario where you're making money, you're getting the quality that you want consistently over the long haul? That, my friends, is negotiations. That is collective bargaining. We have distributive bargaining and collective bargaining. And I want you to think of the times that you have negotiated. If you don't know the distinction or you don't have an idea what the difference is, how do you know which one to turn on or which one to turn off? When you're going to put that hat on, when you're going to take that hat off? Because every scenario is different. Before you walk into a car dealership, you should be thinking to yourself, this is distributive bargaining. I have a price, I have a point, I'm not there to make friends, and I'm going to be hard-nosed. End of story. End of story. But when you start talking about, okay, I need to source some materials from China, I need to start working with some material companies in Germany, whatever that may be, well, now you're talking about collective bargaining. And now you're talking about a relationship. And now you're talking about quality and consistency over the long haul. This is, I can't bring this point home enough, but you learning it here in international business, this is relevant and this is where it starts. For the rest of your lives, you should be able to take this with you when you walk out the door of this class. You should be able to say, okay, is this distributive or this collective? I put the hat on and put the hat off. What if you know the salesman? That's right, it doesn't matter. If you know the salesman, well, so much the better, in the sense that you should be getting an even better deal. Maybe you're going to get their discount, which means you're not going to beat them up as much, right? You're going to use soft power, right? You're going to use your influence. You're going to use your influence. And never do business with friends, that's not necessarily always true. Ben, I do subscribe to your thought, but there are, just like in every situation, there are exceptions. There are exceptions. Okay, so never is a strong word. Maybe there's another way to phrase it. Almost. Okay, all right. We're giving 1 point to extra point to Ben. He got me on that one. So almost never. All right. Now that we understand the difference between collective and distributive bargaining, and you, in your mind, will never forget this, now we can start talking about some more global relevant negotiation tactics. I'm going to start off with an example. It's very common, first of all, when you're doing international business for that culture, and I'm generalizing, but it's very common outside of the United States for individuals to want to get to know you. You go to Mexico, on average, you're going to spend the first 2 to 4 days in Mexico, on average, 2 to 4 days, building the relationship, meaning that not once are you going to show your American side and start talking business. Before they do business with you, they want to know who you are. In China, bigger contracts, bigger relationships, it's the same way. 4 or 5 days. On average, globally, outside of the U.S., it's something like 4 or 5 days. Only in the United States will we do business with somebody without ever knowing anything about it. Long-term business. But we want to get to the point. I was in Italy a few years ago with my wife, and we were there looking at a manufacturing facility for a local company here in Arizona to start producing a certain product. And it was primarily because of the proximity to the market and the cost. We get there to this factory in Lucca, which is up there in that Bellagio area, Lake Como. And they wanted to take us to lunch. They wanted to get to know us first. We wanted to see the factory. We wanted to go over the quality controls. I wanted to start getting down and dirty into the nitty-gritty and get to know their competencies as well as their capabilities. That's the American in me. I had to fight that. While I'm asking them about quality control, they're asking me about how the weather is in Arizona. How many siblings do I have? What my background is, where I went to school. Do I like football in the sense of soccer? They're looking for things in common. I'm talking to them about their manufacturing capacity. I had to shut that switch off because I realized that, strangely enough, I was moving more into this distributive bargaining instead of collective bargaining mode. And I had to flip that switch off, take off the hat, and put on the collective and say, you know what, I'm in another country. This is how they do business. Shut everything down. They wanted to take us to lunch. We went to lunch. And this was actually in 2008, I want to say. 2008, 2009, then 2000, no, it was the end of 2008. And they wanted to know, there are 30 individuals at this beautiful restaurant in the Alps. They call it the Pre-Alps. Beautiful restaurant. My wife and I are sitting there, and we're about ready to eat, about ready to order, and the CEO calls a timeout. And everyone is quiet. And he wants to know our politics. One of the things that you want to steer away from, right? Politics, religion. And I'm sitting there thinking, oh, God. They want to know our politics before they do business with us. Now, I had to put in context into my head that a few months before there were some bombings in Spain in protest of the Iraq War. And there were some issues in Italy regarding terrorism. And a lot of Europeans were looking at the war in Iraq and saying, this was unnecessary. And now you have brought this to our shores. That was the politics they wanted to know. So what I said was, wars happen. I'm not necessarily for them. I'm not necessarily against them. But I don't know enough about it and how it affects you to really give an opinion. And I thought, yay for Aram. I answered the question without getting specific. I basically was all over the map. And do you think that worked? No. That did not work. I had to give a definitive answer. I had to give a definitive answer, which I did. I'm not going to get into that in this class, but I had to give a definitive answer in order for us to start the negotiation process. And when I did, everybody became happy and everybody started the eating, and the CEO gave his blessing to us. And from that point on, negotiations were much, much easier. It was, for me personally, it was a very tense moment. We were turning this trip into somewhat of a vacation. So it was a business stop on the vacation, if you will, now. And here I am, halfway across the world, and I'm being set up with a political question. You'll see in Asia, in many Asian cultures, you'll see that hospitable, very, very hospitable, proud sense of taking care of you. But, don't get me wrong, they're looking for a win-win relationship, but it's how you split up the win-win that matters. I've heard stories of buddies of mine who have been involved in negotiations with the Japanese, where, in fact, it was one of my best friends, his father was negotiating with some Japanese, and they had him at a meeting. And at this meeting, there was a translator on the Japanese side. And every time they would negotiate, or every time there was a, the translator had to translate for the Japanese. After a long day of negotiations, they decided it was time to go to dinner. They went to dinner, and the translator was a no-show. And they're at dinner thinking that the Japanese don't know English. Lo and behold, they sit down and everybody's speaking English. And my buddy's father says, well, wait a minute. I thought that you didn't speak English. I mean, you have a translator. And he said, yes, that's required company policy. Do you know why it's required company policy? Tell me why you think it's required company policy. Why is it required company policy that there be a translator when that executive speaks English? I'm seeing some responses online. I'm going to wait. No? Not so that when they speak Japanese you can understand. It makes you give up faster, as Robert says. It wears you down. It wears you down. Having to go through this process, you want to give up. And when you give up, what does that mean? That means you give up negotiating. And although there may be a win-win situation, again, it's how you divide that win-win up. I've been in negotiations where you're in a meeting and they're whining and dining you. You get there, you're there for a week. They're providing food for you. Lunch, dinner. And then, when it comes time to negotiate on the last day, they pick you up from your hotel as normal. They drive you to their corporate headquarters. As usual, you go into the building, and you know it's negotiation time. Lunch comes up. But there's no lunch there. Lunchtime has arrived and there's no lunch there. All of a sudden, the air conditioning, you feel like you're in an ice box. And you go and you ask the secretary or the assistant when lunch is going to be there, and they say, oh, it's coming, we've ordered it. An hour and a half goes by, no lunch, and now you're in an ice box. And you're supposed to meet to do the final negotiations at 4 p.m. No lunch. You're tired, you're angry, you're upset, you're hungry. More importantly, you're freezing. Your counterparty arrives at 5. You're starving to death, it seems like. Why does that happen? And they're telling you, oh, they made a mistake with your order, we're sorry, you can't, what are you going to do? You're going to beat up on the messenger, the administrative assistant? Absolutely not. It's corporate policy to negotiate that way. In other cultures, they want you to give up. Although they are creating somewhat of a hostile environment, it's an approach where they are still looking for a win-win, but where you're going to give up the farm. And your win is going to be like this. Their win is going to be like this. This is, that's right. They want to make you crack, as Artemis says. And they may get information out of you. I had a trip to France one time, and it was in the outskirts of Paris, and it was actually in a whole new town, Lyon. And he left my briefcase and whatnot. I went to go get lunch. We went to go get lunch. Left my briefcase and everything in the office, thinking obviously it's safe. And they were a little paranoid. And they rifled through my paperwork while I was gone. And the only reason why I found out was because when I returned, they forgot to put my briefcase back. And then when I got it back, the papers weren't exactly in the same position that I left them in, and I tend to be somewhat particular about that. And so they were looking for an advantage of what it was that I was looking for. In India, we were in Bombay looking to negotiate with a school. Some really great people, some really nice people. Only to realize that none of those individuals that I was talking to for 3 days were a decision maker. And do you know what they were really doing, as nice and as kind as they were? Do you know what they were really doing? The whole time, I thought they were decision makers. They led themselves. I even asked them, and that's going to be one of our points here today in global negotiations, is make sure that you are talking to the decision maker. Make sure you're speaking with the decision maker. So this whole time I'm feeling warm and fuzzy, and after the third day, then they tell me, I'm asking them, okay, so let's memorialize this and let's work on this and get this done. And they finally look at each other and say, well, we don't have the authority. Well, wait a minute, I asked you if you were the decision maker earlier. Well, yes, but we don't have the final say. So I was tired, hungry, a little upset, and here now they bring in the decision maker. They were wearing me down. And wearing me down. And did it work? Did it work? Of course I was worn down. And of course I was tired. And of course I was angry. And when they asked me if I was hungry, or they asked me if I was tired and that they should take us back, I said no. I said no. I said, I've got all day, all night. I'm fine. I didn't want to let them know that I was tired and angry. Do you see how negotiations are? You have to have a certain amount of resilience. You're going to have to dig deep. This was a corporate meeting. We're not talking about, a couple of dollars here and there. We're talking about a significant long-term relationship. Make sure you're speaking to the decision maker. I can't tell you how important this is. Yeah, these kind of tactics can backfire, but let me tell you, when you're halfway across the world, when you're in Bombay and you're in another country, and you've spent a certain amount of time and a certain amount of energy to get to a point where now you can meet with the decision maker, if you let your emotions get to you and you decide forget it and walk away, they have won. And they know you're a quitter. And they've broken you. You can't be bitter, you have to be better. That's what collective bargaining is about. Not bitter, but better. A couple of years ago, I was negotiating for a local company for some raw materials. Raw materials coming out of China and India. The supplier gave us a phenomenal deal. Phenomenal deal. And I got a few pats on the back. Great job, Aaron, great job. And I started thinking about this and I thought, well, wait a minute. I did some numbers, and I thought, I have no idea how this individual is going to provide the quality at that price. I just don't see it, especially long term. So I had to go back to the company and say, hey, listen, guys, I'm just going to tell you that we're going to have to go back to the negotiating table with this company, and we're going to have to raise our prices on ourselves. What? Wait a minute. You're telling me we're going to have to raise the price on ourselves? And I said, yeah. Why? Wait a minute, why? This is fine. Just leave it as it is, Aaron. This is fine. We don't need to do anything. You're not going to get the quality and you're not going to get the consistency long term that you're looking for. You're going to be looking for another supplier in the next 2 months. But we just signed a year-long agreement. They are bound for a year. Try suing them in India on that contract you just signed. Try legal repercussions. Try to hire legal representation. It's just going to cost you money, time, and more frustration. I had to fight tooth and nail to actually go back, finally got back to the Indian company and said, listen, I don't think that you guys understand the nature of our relationship. We really want this to be much longer than a year supply relationship. Oh, everything changed. The prices did go up, verified the quality and the consistency. It costs money to renegotiate every single time there's a problem. It costs time. Time is money. And time is one of the most valuable resources that we have as humans. In fact, probably the most valuable resource we have. We don't have the luxury of living forever. A second gone is a second you will not get back. You don't have time to be haggling in distributed bargaining scenarios every 3 months because you won short term doesn't mean you're going to win long term. I had to go back and renegotiate this for a long term relationship. Make sure you're speaking with the decision maker. Make sure you have done your research and you have tried to immerse yourself or acclimate yourself somewhat to that market, that culture, and that you have a cultural IQ. What is a cultural IQ? What is a cultural IQ? What is it that I'm talking about here? And then you have seen win-lose scenarios in collective situations. You know, there are going to be certain things that you're going to have to give up. There are going to be certain things that you're going to have to eat. But the reality of it is that if there are too many win-lose scenarios in a collective bargaining situation, they're going to be looking for somebody else to replace you because it's not good enough. You follow me? They may need the short-term cash, and then bam, they're gone. Good point, Ben. And Tim states that aware of how different cultures conduct their process, that's part of it. I'm going to make it real simple. Empathy. What is empathy? What is empathy? That's right, you put yourself in their shoes. Now, I'm not talking about sympathy, I'm talking about empathy. If you know how they think, you should be able to piece together that presentation in such a way that you get what you want. If you're forcing someone to do something a certain way and it's just not culturally acceptable to them, man, oh man, you're gonna have some trouble. Cultural IQ is about empathy. Cultural intelligence is about being flexible. How many of you know someone who just isn't flexible in any way? They're not wanting to try any foods that outside of their norm, outside of their traditional meals. They make fun of other cultures in the way that they do things. They don't understand it. They don't even want to understand it. Well, they're probably going to have a little bit of a hard time traveling. This is where you get, unfortunately, that negative American outlook, where you go to France or you go to Germany and the beer is served at what temperature? Yeah, room temperature. It's warm. 98.6 degrees. Artemis, you and I are going to have to, it sounds like you know your beers. We're going to have to head out one of these days. Or you ask the maitre d', the waiter, what's in that? What's in that? Oh, my goodness. What's in that? Ugh. How many of you have seen somebody make a face when they're asking, even in a local restaurant here, what's in that? Oh. No, Pat, those kind of things. I was in China, and we were in this street in Beijing, and I forget the name of the street, but it's at nighttime, they have all of these delicacies and exotic foods, and people set up their little tents, and it's like a mile long, it seems, and you walk along, and they have things like fried worms, scorpions, fried, anything. And I was there with some other Americans, and I was open. I'm like, hey, we know where we're going. We know we're going to this market. And one of my buddies, who I'm not very proud to say, got there, and he thought it was funny to say, oh, gross, ugh, and make all these faces. I had to literally pull him to the side and say, listen, they love this food. They like this. This is their culture. And you're making fun of it. I just want you to be aware that to you it's gross, to them it's not. I ate some of that stuff, and I didn't grimace. I didn't go, or else, and I didn't have to eat it. I wanted to try some of it. Let me give you an example. I'm of Mexican descent, and in my family, we love and eat menudo. And sometimes when I say the word menudo, I get people say, oh, bro, what is that? Isn't that cow intestines? They do the dying cockroach. And I'm not really offended by it, but I'm a little put off. It's like, come on, this is my culture. This is what I love. And Menudo was a band that Ricky Martin was in. So the point is to be open-minded. To be open-minded. And let me tell you something. That old adage, when in Rome, do as the Romans, really does apply. It really does apply. In India, in Bombay, I was a guest in a house. And they had laid out this entire menu for me every single day. Breakfast, lunch, and dinner. There were about 12 dishes every single morning. I I was expected to eat every single one of them because they were proud of their food and they were proud of their culture. I would have 4 juices. I would drink a juice, and then they would bring me another of a different type. I gained about 10 pounds in a week, and I ate every single bit of it because I knew that, and it was good. I would tell you, it was very good. Well, it's hard not to beat, it's hard to beat homemade food anywhere in the world. But I ate it, even if I didn't want it, because that the matriarch, the mother of the household, was watching me eat every morsel. And I was a little uncomfortable with it, like, oh, yeah, okay. Undoing my belt, it was like I was in a contest. Now, the food was good, but I made sure that I let them know that I was open. Haggis. Just talking about haggis recently. Negotiations is about acclimating yourself to the culture that you're negotiating in. I'm not talking about changing and faking and make-believing that you're somebody that you're not. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about being open. I'm talking about being flexible. And there are limits that I have. There are things that I won't eat. There are things that I won't do. But if it's not going to damage my pride, or it's not going to injure me, then most of the time I'm open. Most of the time I am open. If you do this, you will have a result. That result is going to allow you to transfer knowledge about one culture to another. It's going to allow you to apply. So let's take in India. It's going to allow you to maybe move a little more freely from one part of the country to the next. That openness. It's going to allow you to transfer that knowledge to other individuals. There are a lot of people that can't or won't. They refuse. I don't want to say can't. They refuse to be open-minded. And I have family members like this who refuse. I have family members that are of Mexican descent or Mexican, and they will refuse to eat a certain food from another culture. Oh. You know what? Those people give you opportunity. Not everyone can be a little flexible and a little open. Not everyone can. If you can be open, if you can be flexible, you'll be able to use your knowledge and transfer that into real-world negotiations for your business. I'm here to tell you that negotiating is about acclimating. It's not about pretending. It's not about faking. It's not about compromising your own personal values or beliefs. It's about being open. You don't have to try anything. You don't have to do anything. But if there are certain things that aren't going to compromise your values or your pride or your traditions, then go ahead and do it. Then go on ahead and do it. Whether you like it or not, whether you like it or not, in this world, you're going to be a global manager. You are a global manager. Whether you like it or not, you are a global manager. How many of you work for a business where they have an interest in another country and you have to talk to them? You have to work with them. Whether you like it or not, your generation is a global management. You are global managers. In fact, I'm going to put this down. Whether you like it or not, you are a global manager. Why? Yeah, even if my former employer is based in Arizona, that's absolutely true. Because you're working with people from other cultures, other countries. Why is it? It's because the global marketplace is here in the U.S. The global marketplace is here in the U.S. It's here. You have competition every single day. In Arizona, I'm going to tell you, I'm a native of Arizona, born and raised, and when I was a young kid, I remember there was one Indian restaurant in the entire state of Arizona. One Indian restaurant, and when we would walk, we would park our cars in downtown ASU and we would walk down Rural Road past this one Indian restaurant, and I remember to the football game, and I remember always looking at this Indian restaurant and seeing some Indian individuals and seeing the smells and hearing some of the discussions, although I didn't understand them. And now, in Arizona, the beauty has expanded, the culture has expanded. There is an Indian restaurant on almost every corner. There is a lot of naan being made. I am here to tell you, there is a lot of naan being made. How do I see smells? Well, no, I mean, I could smell the food, and I could see the people standing out front of the restaurant. We'd have to walk right by it. I could see the people, I could see the restaurant, you could smell the curry. And now it's in almost every corner, it seems like there is an Indian restaurant. You're a global manager whether you like it or not. Now let's take a step forward and start talking again a little bit about global negotiations. We understand the difference in collective and distributive bargaining. We understand some of the scenarios are going to be put in. Some of the scenarios are going to be put in front of you. Number one, stereotypes. are not productive. Groupthink is not necessarily productive. If you're right, then I guess it's productive, but groupthink being there is very little diversity in your group and you're all thinking the same way, and thus you come up with a conclusion that is not accurate. That's why I say it's not necessarily, because sometimes you might actually get it right. I don't know if they had curry buns. I want to also bring across this point that global business is porous. What do I mean by that? Global business is porous. Global business is porous. We've been talking about it. Lots of openings. You're close, men, you're close. And there are, you know what? The more I think about it, holes, not necessarily, Tim. People flow, opportunities. Yes, those opportunities are here. Those opportunities are here. We talked in one of the first few classes about whether or not it's good or bad that international companies, foreign companies, let me be specific, foreign companies are buying U.S. interests. My brother-in-law works for a company that was just bought by a Japanese company. Just acquired by a Japanese company. You see how fluid and how porous and how there are lots of opportunities. Lots of opportunities. If you want to work internationally, it's as simple as this. If you want to work internationally, it's as simple as this. Develop a cultural IQ. It's as simple as that. The opportunities will come knocking on your door because not everyone is suitable to travel and do business and work in, say, India or Israel or Brazil or Indonesia. Not everyone can acclimate themselves so easily. You develop a cultural IQ and you're going to negotiate more effectively. You're going to create those opportunities, as Ben said. Okay, watch the movie Gung Ho for an assignment. I don't know what that movie is. What is that, Robert?
I'm not sure.
I will give you an extra assignment, Ben. You yourself will be required to provide a summary of Gung Ho. I don't know. I don't know what I haven't seen the movie or heard of it. I don't know who's in it. But I know you're being facetious. Nonetheless, develop a cultural IQ. All right? There's a Greek mythological figure, Proteus. There's a Greek mythological figure named Proteus, and Proteus had the ability to change and adapt to his environment. He became mindful of the situation, mindful of the environment that he was in. And I haven't drawn a triangle in a while. I'm going to have to figure that one out. But developing a cultural IQ means developing your knowledge of that particular culture that you're going to be working with. Being mindful of that culture, and understanding the behavioral etiquette. And in the center here, the sweet spot, that's your cultural IQ. That's your cultural IQ. I say, you know what? I think I've heard of that movie. It came out a long time ago, right? That's like the 1980s. Yeah, yeah. It's like a 1980 movie. I think I actually remember that. I may have actually seen that. Now, what is mindfulness? We talked about. We understand knowledge and behavioral etiquette, but what is mindfulness? Jedi speak. Boy, oh boy, Ben is on one today. Ben has got the silly willies today. I love it. I love it. I'm serious, and he's taking me back to being a little more lighthearted. Jedi, yes. Mindfulness is the ability, to observe and interpret. Let me give you an example. And we talked about this yesterday. When you are negotiating, and let's say it's a distributed bargaining situation in another country, and they say no, you ask them for a certain price below what they're willing to provide, and they say no, what does that mean? Tell me what that means. What's your interpretation? Let's start negotiating. That's exactly what that means. Continue negotiating. Continue negotiating. If you stop and walk away, what have you gained? That's them saying, yeah, okay, let's begin. How many of you have been in an international negotiation where they say, oh, no. Well, let's see, oh, no. Oh, well, okay, but look. Well, no. It's a back and forth. They're wanting to engage. They're giving you permission. That's right. You lose and you gain nothing by walking away. And as Americans, we don't have enough mindfulness. It's about reading people. It's about reading people and observing their behaviors and observing their actions and listening to them, and really not just hearing what they said, but listening to what they're saying. When they say no, oftentimes, that means let's get started. More often than not. More often than not. In Europe, that is a starting point. When someone says no to your price, that's more often a starting point This is both in Europe and in Asia. You're going to respond confidently and you're going to respond in a bantering mode. In the Middle East as well. That's right. In the Middle, you're absolutely right. In most other cultures around the world, outside of the U.S., when they say no, that means let's begin. Yeah, and that's a good point. Tim, if they say yes to you on the first try, you probably shot yourself in the foot. Your price point was probably very high, and they're willing to accommodate. And you can go back and say no. I remember this one time I was negotiating for a watch. And I didn't need another watch. And it was with a Chinese gentleman. And that's oftentimes the best time to start distributed bargaining is when you don't need it. The problem is you're going to spend money that you don't need to spend also. But be prepared to walk away. In fact, before I get any further with distributed bargaining, in fact, I'm going to put it on the first place. And collective bargaining, actually. Be prepared to walk away. If you're not prepared to walk away, you're going to lose. Before you go into the negotiation, if you are not prepared to walk away, you're going to lose. Always be prepared to walk away in the sense that no matter how hard you try to create that win-win, it may not happen. It may not arrive. You may have to walk away. Where was I?
You're talking about being prepared to walk away.
Oh, I was talking about the Chinese gentleman I was negotiating with the watch.
Oh, watch.
And I was there looking at the watch. I gave him a price that I'd be willing to pay. He said no. Did I walk away? No. But you know what happened is I was with my wife, and she can't stand distributed bargaining. She can't stand haggling. She'd rather pay and just be done with it and let's get out of here. And she started to see that I wasn't going to accept the price and he wasn't going to accept the price, that it was going to be a haggling situation, and she started to take a couple of steps away. And I saw his eyes track her. started to speak a little faster. Because he knew that although I wasn't walking away, when she walked out that door, I was going to follow her. And so he said no to my price point, and he gave me another price. And I see him tracking her. And then I kind of start moving a little bit this way too, and I gave him a price lower than my first price. By the time we got to the door, the price was so low, I could not take the watch. I asked him for the Chinese price. He got a chuckle out of that. The Chinese price is the price that Chinese give each other versus what they would give in America. I ended up not buying the watch. The sad part about it is I ended up not buying the watch. And I ended up not buying the watch because, well, there are a lot of reasons, but primarily because I hadn't gotten my wife a really good watch yet. And so if I had gotten another watch, she probably would have started to wonder about what I really value in the relationship. You know, is it my watches? So, the Chinese price was close to half. Ben, it was close to half. Close to half of what the retail was. It was probably closer actually to 40%, 35-40% now I think about it. And Ben asked a fair question. So how do you really know when they really mean no? When they shoo you out the door and close the door. And even then, they may try to push you out the door, and I've had this happen. Again, this is distributed bargaining. They push you out the door, and then they bring you back in. It's a game. It's a dance is what it is. It's not a game, it's a dance. How well do you dance? That's the question. How well do you dance? If you're a hard-nosed individual, you're not going to make it very far. If you're just, there's a way to get your price point without being a bulldog. There's a way to get your price point through finesse. There's a way to get your price point without intimidation. Even with distributed bargaining. And this is what I want you to take home with you today on negotiating. This is the value that you bring. We call it cross-cultural communication. And your ability to communicate effectively, your ability to communicate across cultures, to be mindful, to be flexible, to be empathetic, to be mindful, to be flexible, to be empathetic affects the bottom line in business. The bottom line, it affects the bottom line in business. Because at the end of the day, bless you, at the end of the day, that's that's what you're going to be judged on is, did you save us money and did you create that long-term relationship? Because you're going to be judged by American standards. What is the bottom line? Your inabilities to be cross-culturally communicative are going to affect your career. Better said, your abilities to affect positively and negotiate across cultures will affect the bottom line and your career positively. That's the way we want to think. But some of us are a little hard-headed. And for those of us who are hard-headed, I don't like to instill fear in you, but if you're not willing to communicate across cultures, you're not going to bring the bottom line numbers that your organization is expecting. That's going to affect you personally. I prefer to look at it in the sense that your ability, your openness, your willingness to be open. How many of you have been to another country and you tried to speak their language, even though you bludgeoned it, you tried to say a few words? And what was the response you got? Where you tried to speak their language, did they shun you and push you away, or did they accept you and smile and try to help you? That's right, they had an appreciation. And I have had it in France where I bludgeoned French and the waiter walked away from me, disgusted. And that happens. That happens. Luckily, I happen to be with my girlfriend at the time who spoke French, and so, of course, he came back. He just didn't talk to me. But more often than not, they will chuckle, they will laugh, but they will say, wow, let's help him or her. Because you're trying. They have pride in their culture. They have pride in where they're from, in their language, and they will embrace you. More often than not, they will embrace you. Now, in France, I want to make it specific. In Paris, I had that happen. The rest of France, Paris is like any big city. I mean, think if you're from another country and you go to New York City for the first time. It can be a little bit of a culture shock. Heck, going to New York City from Phoenix is a culture shock in the sense that people are a little more rough, right? People are a little more rough, we'll just say. So, Paris can be a little bit rough if you don't speak the language. And you know what's funny is that waiter spoke English. In Paris, they expect you to speak French, even if you don't know it. They expect you to speak. They don't want to speak English, even though they know English. They expect you to speak French. Now, in other parts of France, so we get this snotty attitude that we have of Parisians. Well, it's not really that snotty. Maybe it's a little overzealous in their pride of their country or their culture. But in other parts of France, I've had nothing but beautiful experience. In fact, even in Paris, I love Paris. Love Paris. You're just going to have to take somebody that speaks the language. Or be with Well, anyways, you're just going to have to work that one out. Yes, many people in Europe, in Switzerland, I remember in Switzerland, I'm sitting there in this chalet, a guest of family members, friends, family, I don't know how I got there. Anyways, I'm sitting there in this chalet and we're eating fondue. And they pour some kirsch, which is an alcohol, their cultural alcohol, if you will. Kind of like vodka in Russia or tequila in Mexico or wine or champagne in France. Kirsch is what they have in Switzerland. And it's strong, potent stuff. And I'm not saying this in a sense of, but I mean, I can sometimes hang with certain cultures when it comes to drinking. I'm not saying I can out-drink anybody, and I don't want to ever out-drink anybody, but that was potent stuff. And I was talking to the lady, she said, yeah, we're going to go to Latin America next summer. So we're going to learn Spanish. She already spoke 5 languages. When they go to another country, they learn the language first. Amazing. I mean, not really that amazing in the sense that it seems, yeah, very natural. You should learn the language before you go. But they were going to develop a serious fluency. And you're right. There are people that speak better than we do, better English than we do in terms of grammatics. In terms of grammatics, is that even the word? Grammatically speaking, we'll say. Point well taken. Point proved. The bottom line is it affects your profits, it affects your long-term relationships, and your cross-cultural communication is going to affect the bottom line. You often hear of companies hiring Americans that are acclimated. I don't know if any of you know anybody that speaks a different language fluently and understands a culture fluently, but they're often hired just to do very trivial work, and they get paid very well. They get paid very, very well. I'll tell you, we're going to be taking another deeper dive into negotiations on Tuesday at 10 a.m. This is just the beginning. This is just to whet your palate. We're going to be talking about more negotiating tactics and how to win against other cultures. We're not going to disparage other cultures, but let me tell you, I've been in enough negotiations where I know that they are trying to wear me down. And they're going to try to wear you down so that you give up. They're going to try to make you throw up that white flag. All right, 10 a.m. Tuesday, same channel. See you guys then. Any questions or comments?
Did you answer the last one?
What was the last one? If you can do this properly, you can negotiate factors a lot easier. Yes, that's true. Many people in here, yes. Discussion board this week. The discussion board this week is going to be about cultures. I hope it's open. It's going to be about cultures. And I want you to find an article, or I want you to find something that, it doesn't have to be specific to you know, how important cultural communication is, but something that you find interesting in an article about the culture that maybe pops up. Okay, and I'm going to make sure that that's pointed out on the discussion board. But that's going to be the discussion this week, is cultures and negotiations, because that was a big part of today. Cultures and negotiations. Any other questions or comments? All right. I will see you guys Tuesday. Have a fantastic weekend. Be safe. Over and out.